Could a dog swimming miles offshore change a man's life forever? When a lonely Maine fisherman spots a golden retriever fighting desperate waves, he has no idea this rescue will spark an incredible chain of events. Join me on this emotional journey of second chances and unexpected heroism. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from as we dive into a story where one act of compassion might just save an entire coastline. The salt-laden breeze whipped across Morton Blackwell's weathered face as he guided his modest fishing trawler, the Sea Widow, through the choppy waters 5 miles off the Maine coastline. At 60, Morton's once robust frame had begun to bend slightly under the weight of decades at sea, but his eyes, pale blue like the winter sky, remained sharp as ever. Deep creases fanned from their corners, testament to years squinting against the glare of sunlight on water. His calloused hands, spotted with age and stained by years of handling fish and nets, gripped the wheel with practiced ease. It was early May, and the morning fog was finally burning off as the sun climbed higher. Morton had been out since dawn, his usual solitary ritual unchanged for 3 years since Catherine's passing. The silence aboard was broken only by the steady chug of the engine and occasional cry of seagulls wheeling overhead. Another day, another dollar, he muttered to himself, a habit developed during long stretches of solitude. His voice, gruff from disuse and the occasional whiskey, barely carried over the ambient noise of the boat. That's when he saw it, a flash of gold amongst the steel-gray waves. Morton blinked, certain his eyes were playing tricks. But there it was again, the unmistakable shape of a dog's head bobbing in the water, impossibly far from shore. What in God's name? He breathed, immediately adjusting course. The dog was swimming desperately, its movements growing more labored with each passing second. Morton's heart hammered against his ribs as he closed the distance. A lifetime at sea had taught him to respect the ocean's deadly power. No dog should be alive this far out, let alone still swimming. As he drew alongside, he could see it was a golden retriever, exhaustion evident in its straining movements. Without hesitation, Morton cut the engine to idle and moved to the side, leaning down with arms outstretched. "Come on, fella," he called. "Over here." The dog's intelligent eyes locked onto Morton, and with its last reserves of strength, it paddled toward the boat. Morton reached further, nearly tumbling overboard himself, and managed to grasp the animal's collar. With a grunt, he heaved the waterlogged creature aboard. The retriever collapsed on the deck, sides heaving, tongue lolling. Morton quickly fetched a towel and his lunch cooler, pouring fresh water into the lid. "Easy now," he soothed, his normally taciturn nature softening as he knelt beside the animal. "You're safe." The dog lapped weakly at the water, then looked up at Morton with soulful amber eyes that seemed to hold a story too complex for words. "How the hell did you get all the way out here?" Morton wondered aloud, examining the dog for injuries. Apart from exhaustion and dehydration, the animal seemed remarkably intact. Around its neck was a collar, the tags corroded by salt water. Morton squinted at the partially legible lettering. CP. Morton Blackwell had spent the last 3 years avoiding entanglements of any kind. With people, with emotions, with the past. His life was carefully arranged to prevent the messy complications of connection. Yet as the golden retriever's breathing steadied under his hand, something shifted in his chest, a rusty door creaking open after years of disuse. "Well," he said quietly, "looks like we'd better get you to shore." He couldn't possibly imagine how this soggy creature was about to upend his carefully constructed solitude. The journey back to shore felt longer than usual, Morton's eyes constantly darting between the horizon and the golden retriever now huddled under a tarp. He'd thrown over the animal for warmth. Twice he paused to offer more water, which the dog accepted gratefully, but with a strange restraint, as if conserving energy. "Trained," Morton observed aloud. "You're somebody's well-trained dog." As the coastline of Osprey Point came into view, the dog's ears perked up. It struggled to stand, wobbling on the rocking deck. "Easy there," Morton cautioned, one hand steadying the wheel while reaching toward the animal with the other. "We're almost home." Home was a generous description for Morton's dwelling, a weathered Cape Cod cottage perched on a rocky bluff overlooking the harbor. Once painted a cheerful blue, the color had faded to a ghostly gray that matched the overcast days that frequently blanketed the Maine coast. The small dock extending from his property looked precarious, but had withstood decades of nor'easters. Morton guided the Sea Widow alongside the dock with practiced ease, secured the lines, and turned his attention to his unexpected passenger. The retriever was watching him intently, seeming to understand the situation perfectly. "Can you make it up?" he asked, feeling foolish for speaking to a dog as if it could answer. To his surprise, the animal waited patiently as Morton climbed onto the dock, then carefully followed, its legs still shaky but managing the step with deliberate caution. Together they made their way up the worn path to the cottage. Inside, the space was Spartan but meticulously organized, a fisherman's practicality evident in every corner. Fishing gear hung in precise arrangements, books on weather patterns and tide tables stacked neatly beside a worn armchair. The only decorative items were a collection of scrimshaw and a single photograph of a smiling woman with Morton's eyes, displayed on the mantel but covered with a fine layer of dust. "Right," Morton said, awkwardly addressing his guest. "Let's get you dried proper." He retrieved a clean towel from a linen closet that smelled faintly of mothballs and began rubbing down the dog's golden coat. As he worked, he examined the collar more carefully. The tag was indeed corroded, but he could make out part of a name. Capt, followed by what might have been Anne. "Captain, is it?" Morton asked. The dog's tail gave a single definitive wag. "Well, Captain, you've had quite the adventure today." Morton prepared a makeshift bed from an old blanket and set out a bowl of water and another containing tuna, the best he could offer for a hungry dog. Captain approached the food cautiously, sniffed, and ate with surprising decorum. As evening approached, Morton settled into his routine, checking weather reports, preparing a simple dinner, making notes in his fishing log. But the familiar silence of his home was now punctuated by the soft sounds of another breathing creature. Captain lay near the wood stove, amber eyes following Morton's movements around the small space. Later, as Morton sat in his armchair pretending to read, but actually watching the dog, Captain suddenly stood and walked to the window facing the sea. The animal placed its paws on the sill and stared intently at the darkening waters, a low whine escaping its throat. "Looking for someone out there?" Morton asked quietly. Captain turned to look at him, and in that moment, Morton felt an uncanny connection, as if the dog were trying to communicate something of vital importance. The feeling disturbed him, nudging against the emotional walls he'd so carefully constructed after Catherine's death, after the bitter words with his daughter Jennifer that had driven her away. "Don't get attached," he warned himself aloud. "We'll find your owner tomorrow." But as he prepared for bed, Captain followed him to the bedroom door and settled directly across the threshold, as if standing guard. "Suit yourself," Morton muttered, but something warm and long forgotten stirred in his chest as he drifted off to sleep with the comforting sound of another heartbeat in his too-empty house. The morning light filtered through the salt-crusted windows, casting long shadows across Morton's kitchen floor. He moved through his usual routine, coffee brewing, weather radio crackling with the day's forecast, but today's rhythm was different, punctuated by the presence of the golden retriever watching his every move. "Supposed to be clear today," Morton remarked, pouring kibble he'd retrieved from the general store into a bowl. He'd walked the mile into town at dawn, leaving Captain dozing by the wood stove. "Good day to find your people." Captain approached the food bowl cautiously but didn't eat, instead looking up at Morton with what could only be described as expectation. Morton sighed, reaching for his phone, a basic model he kept primarily for emergencies. "Not much of a photographer," he muttered, awkwardly positioning it to capture Captain's image. The dog sat perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of the task. After several attempts and quiet curses at technology, Morton managed to post the photos to the community bulletin board online, something the local librarian had helped him set up years ago when Catherine first fell ill. The post was simple. Found, golden retriever, male, partial name on tag, capped, 5 miles offshore. Contact Morton. The response was immediate and overwhelming. His phone pinged continuously with messages, some offering to adopt, others sharing their own stories of lost pets. Morton silenced the device, uncomfortable with the sudden intrusion of so many voices into his quiet existence. "You're popular," he told Captain gruffly. The dog tilted his head as if to say, "Did you expect anything less?" By afternoon, most inquiries had proven fruitless, no one claiming actual ownership. Morton had just resigned himself to another night with his four-legged guest when a particular message arrived. Unlike the others, this one struck him with the ring of truth. "Mr. Blackwell, I believe the dog you found belongs to my niece, Dr. Sarah Winters. She's a marine biologist who disappeared during a research expedition 2 weeks ago when her sailboat was caught in an unexpected squall. The authorities have all but abandoned the search. The dog's name is Captain, and he was specially trained to assist in her research. I'm in Nova Scotia but can provide documentation. Please call me at this number." Morton stared at the message, then at Captain. 2 weeks at sea, he whispered incredulously. The dog's ears perked up at his tone. When Morton dialed the number, an elderly woman answered immediately. "Mr. Blackwell, this is Margaret Winters. Thank you for calling." Her voice trembled with barely contained emotion. "Ma'am, I'm not entirely convinced this is your niece's dog," Morton began cautiously. "The odds. Captain has a small notch in his right ear," she interrupted, "and a peculiar habit of placing his paw precisely on your knee when you sit down, as if he's taking your pulse. Sarah trained him to do that for her research subjects." Morton's gaze dropped to Captain, who sat at attention, his right ear indeed bearing a small triangular notch. As if on cue, the dog approached and placed his paw, not randomly, but with deliberate precision, directly on Morton's knee. "Jesus," Morton breathed. "It's really him. My niece is an extraordinary woman, Mr. Blackwell. So is her dog. If Captain survived." The implication hung in the air between them. "Ms. Winters," Morton said, his voice gaining conviction. "I've been on these waters my entire life. If your niece is out there, there might still be a chance." "The Coast Guard has called off the search," Margaret replied, her voice breaking. "They say it's impossible after this long." Morton glanced at Captain, who had returned to the window facing the sea, his posture alert, watchful. "Tell me everything you know about where she was last seen," he said. "And her research might give us a clue." As Margaret spoke, Morton found himself reaching for the nautical charts he kept in a drawer beneath the maritime instruments that had belonged to his father. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with the day's catch or the weather forecast. "I'll call you back," he promised Margaret. "I think Captain here has been trying to tell me something since I found him." After hanging up, Morton knelt beside the retriever. "Your person's still out there, isn't she?" he asked quietly. Captain's intense gaze seemed to hold the answer to questions Morton hadn't even formulated yet. The following day dawned bright and clear, with a light offshore breeze that veteran fishermen recognized as ideal for their work. But Morton Blackwell wasn't heading to his usual fishing grounds. Instead, he plotted a course based on the coordinates Margaret Winters had provided, the last known location of her niece's research vessel before communication was lost. Captain sat in the bow of the Sea Widow, alert and focused in a way that seemed almost human. As they approached the general area where Sarah Winters had last been seen, Morton noticed the dog becoming increasingly agitated. "What is it, boy?" Morton asked, cutting the engine to idle. Captain began to bark, not frantically but with purpose, facing southwest away from their current position. "You want to go that way?" Morton checked his charts, frowning. There's nothing marked there, but the golden retriever's intensity was unmistakable. Morton had spent enough time around working animals to recognize when they were trying to communicate something important. After a moment's hesitation, he turned the wheel and proceeded in the direction Captain indicated. After about 40 minutes of slow progress, with Captain growing more animated by the minute, Morton spotted something on the horizon that shouldn't have been there, a dark smudge where open ocean should be. "What the hell?" he muttered, reaching for his binoculars. Through the lenses, the smudge resolved into a small landmass, an island where his charts showed only open water. "That's not possible," Morton said aloud. "These charts were updated last year." Captain's barking had reached a crescendo, and the dog was now pacing the small deck, occasionally standing with paws on the gunwale, staring intently at the mysterious island. As they drew closer, Morton could see the island wasn't large, perhaps 3 acres at most, but it featured a rocky outcropping at its center that rose about 30 feet above sea level. Most significantly, the formation appeared fresh, with no vegetation, just black volcanic rock and sand. A seismic event, Morton realized, remembering news reports of minor tremors offshore several weeks back. The sea floor must have shifted, Finding a suitable approach wasn't easy, but Morton eventually located a natural inlet where he could anchor the Sea Widow. Captain was practically vibrating with anticipation, and the moment Morton dropped the small dinghy into the water, the dog leapt aboard. "Hold on, you crazy animal," Morton grumbled, though there was no heat in his words. "We don't know what's on this rock." The moment the dinghy touched the black sand beach, Captain bounded ashore and took off at a run, following what appeared to be a path around the base of the rocky outcropping. "Captain, wait," Morton called, securing the dinghy and hurrying after the dog. Around the bend, Morton discovered signs of human presence. A crude lean-to fashioned from what looked like pieces of a shattered fiberglass hull, a small fire pit, and scattered belongings that had clearly been salvaged from a shipwreck. Hope and dread mingled in his chest as he surveyed the scene. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone here?" Only the cry of seagulls answered him. Captain had disappeared from view, but distant barking guided Morton up a narrow trail that wound toward the highest point of the outcropping. The path led to the mouth of a small cave, and it was there that Morton heard something that stopped him in his tracks. A human voice, weak but audible, speaking to Captain. "You came back. How did you find help?" Morton rushed forward, entering the dimly lit cave to find a woman lying on a makeshift bed of salvaged cushions and clothing. Captain was beside her, licking her face as she weakly embraced him. She looked up as Morton's shadow fell across the entrance, her eyes widening with disbelief and hope. "Who?" she managed, her voice raspy from dehydration. "Morton Blackwell," he said, kneeling beside her and quickly assessing her condition. Her face was sunburned and gaunt, her lips cracked from dehydration, but her eyes, a striking sea green, were clear and alert. "Your dog found me. Or I found him. Still not sure which." "Captain," she whispered, looking at the golden retriever with profound affection. He remembered his training. "Dr. Winters?" Morton asked, already reaching for the water bottle in his pack. She nodded weakly, accepting the water with trembling hands. "Sarah," she corrected, taking careful sips as Morton supported her shoulders. "How did you know my name?" "That's a story for when you're stronger," Morton replied. "First, let's get you off this rock." The journey back to the mainland was precarious. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as Morton carefully navigated the waves, one eye on his passenger huddled under blankets in the stern, the other on the horizon. Captain never left Sarah's side, his body pressed against hers as if lending her his warmth and strength. By the time they reached Morton's dock, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fierce oranges and purples. Morton had radioed ahead to the local clinic, and Dr. Eleanor Jenkins was waiting for them with her ancient Jeep Cherokee. "My God, Morton," Eleanor gasped when she saw Sarah's condition. "She needs a hospital." "No hospitals," Sarah managed weakly, clutching Captain's fur. "Please. They'll ask questions." Eleanor and Morton exchanged glances. In small coastal communities like Osprey Point, respecting someone's privacy often trumped protocol. "My clinic, then," Eleanor conceded. "But if your condition worsens, I'm overriding that decision." At the clinic, while Eleanor treated Sarah for dehydration, malnutrition, and exposure, Morton paced the waiting room, Captain watching his every move. When his phone rang, Margaret Winter's name flashed on the screen. "We found her," Morton said without preamble. "She's alive." The sob that came through the line was raw with emotion. "How?" "Your niece is one hell of a survivor," Morton replied. "And that dog of hers. I've never seen anything like it." After arranging for Margaret to travel south as soon as possible, Morton returned to find Eleanor emerging from the examination room, her expression troubled. "She's stable, but weak," Eleanor reported. "What concerns me are the notes she keeps trying to make. Something about water temperatures and migration patterns. She seems fixated on her research, even in this state." Morton nodded slowly. Her aunt mentioned she was studying something important, some kind of unusual current pattern. Eleanor sighed. "Well, she's resting now. I've given her something to help her sleep. You can take Captain home if you want." "No." Morton surprised himself with the firmness in his voice. "I'll stay. Both of us will." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "There's a cot in my office." In the quiet hours that followed, Morton dozed fitfully on the uncomfortable cot, Captain curled at his feet. Around 3 in the morning, he was awakened by the dog's sudden alertness. A moment later, He heard Sarah's voice from the next room. "Captain, where are you?" Morton and the retriever entered the small examination room to find Sarah sitting up, looking disoriented but stronger than before. The four in her arm had replenished much of her lost fluids. "He's right here," Morton said softly. "Hasn't left your side, except when the doc was working on you." Sarah's eyes found his in the dim light. "You're the fisherman who found us." "Found him," Morton corrected, nodding toward Captain, who had already jumped onto the bed and settled against Sarah's side. 5 miles offshore, swimming like he had a mission. "He did," Sarah said, stroking the dog's golden head. "I trained him to find help if we were ever separated at sea. Never thought we'd have to use it." Her voice broke on the last word. Morton pulled a chair closer to the bed. "What happened out there?" Sarah's eyes grew distant. "I was tracking an anomalous warm water current, something that shouldn't exist in these waters. My equipment readings were off the charts. Then the storm hit, out of nowhere." She swallowed hard. "My boat capsized. I managed to grab the emergency kit and Captain, but we were separated in the waves. I found that island, or it found me. An island that wasn't there before," Morton noted. Sarah's gaze sharpened. "Exactly. A new formation, created by recent seismic activity. Do you understand what that means?" Morton shook his head slowly. "The warm current I was tracking, it's being caused by thermal venting from the ocean floor. The tectonic plates are shifting." Her hands gripped the blanket tightly. "This isn't just an isolated event. It could affect the entire northeastern seaboard. You need to rest," Morton said gently, uncomfortable with the intensity in her eyes. "No, you don't understand," Sarah insisted, attempting to sit up straighter. "My research data, it was on my boat. Without it, no one will believe what I've discovered." Captain whined softly, nudging her hand with his nose as if urging her to calm down. "The data can wait," Morton said firmly. "You've been through hell. Your aunt is on her way from Nova Scotia." At the mention of her aunt, Sarah's expression softened. "Aunt Margaret. She must have been so worried." "She never gave up on you," Morton confirmed. "Neither did he." He nodded toward Captain, who watched Sarah with unwavering devotion. Sarah sank back against the pillows, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you," she whispered. "Both of you." As she drifted back to sleep, Morton found himself studying her face. The determination etched there even in repose. Something about her reminded him of Catherine, not in appearance, but in that same quiet strength that had drawn him all those years ago. The thought startled him, and he quickly pushed it away. This woman would recover, thank him properly, and then continue on with her life and her important research. And he would return to his solitary existence. But as Captain's knowing amber eyes met his across the bed, Morton wondered if anything would ever be quite the same again. 2 days later, Sarah was strong enough to be moved to Morton's cottage. Eleanor had insisted she shouldn't be alone, and Margaret wouldn't arrive for another 3 days due to weather delaying flights from Halifax. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but as Morton helped Sarah settle into his spare room, a space that had been Catherine's sewing room and had stood empty for years, he felt the walls of his solitude cracking further. "I'm not used to having guests," Morton said gruffly, setting down Sarah's meager belongings, mostly items donated by Eleanor and other townspeople after hearing of the rescue. "I promise not to be a burden," Sarah replied, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. Her skin had regained some color, but she still moved with the caution of someone whose body had been pushed to its limits. "Just until Aunt Margaret arrives." Captain jumped onto the bed beside her, making himself at home. The dog's presence had transformed Morton's cottage, bringing life to corners that had gathered dust and silence for too long. Later that evening, as Morton prepared a simple dinner of fish chowder, his late wife's recipe that he hadn't made in years, Sarah emerged from her room, moving slowly but determinedly toward his kitchen table. She carried a notebook Eleanor had given her, already filled with hasty scribbles and diagrams. "You should be resting," Morton said, setting bowls on the worn wooden table. "I've rested enough," Sarah insisted. "My work can't wait." Morton raised an eyebrow as he ladled steaming chowder into the bowls. "The ocean's been there for millions of years. Pretty sure it can wait another day or two." Sarah didn't smile at his attempt at humor. "That's just it, Morton. Things are changing faster than anyone realizes." She opened her notebook, revealing pages of calculations and hastily drawn maps. "The thermal vent I discovered isn't an isolated phenomenon. It's part of a larger shift happening beneath the surface. Morton sat across from her, his weathered face impassive. Eat first. Science later. Sarah took a spoonful of chowder, her eyes widening at the flavor. This is incredible. Catherine's recipe, Morton said shortly, not meeting her gaze. Your wife? Sarah asked gently. Morton nodded once, focusing on his food. She had excellent taste, Sarah said. After several silent moments of eating, she added, I lost someone too. My research partner, David. Antarctic expedition, 3 years ago. Crevasse collapse. Morton's eyes flicked up to meet hers, recognition passing between them. The unspoken understanding of those who have watched their worlds collapse and somehow continued breathing. That why you work alone now? He asked. That's why I work with Captain, Sarah corrected, glancing at the golden retriever who lay nearby, ever watchful. Less complicated, more reliable. Morton's mouth quirked in the ghost of a smile. Can't argue with that. After dinner, despite Morton's protests, Sarah insisted on spreading her notes across the table. I need to reconstruct my research from memory, she explained. Before I forget anything crucial. What exactly were you studying out there? Morton asked, curiosity finally overcoming his reluctance to engage. Sarah pushed back a strand of her auburn hair, tucking it behind her ear in a gesture that spoke of long habit. The Gulf of Maine has always been known for its cold, nutrient-rich waters. It's what makes this region's fishing so productive. But over the past 5 years, I've been tracking anomalous warm currents, not just from climate change, but something more localized and intense. She sketched rapidly on a fresh page. Then 3 months ago, I detected a thermal signature that couldn't be explained by normal oceanic patterns. It was as if someone had turned on an underwater heater in a specific location. Morton frowned. I have noticed changes in the fish migrations. Species showing up that don't belong this far north. Sarah's eyes lit up. Exactly. You've seen it firsthand. She leaned forward eagerly. What species? When did you first notice? Triggerfish, for one, Morton replied. Started appearing in my nets about 4 months back. Never seen them this far north before. And the lobster traps, they've been coming up emptier. The locals blamed overfishing, but your instincts told you something else, Sarah finished for him. Morton nodded slowly. The sea talks, if you know how to listen. That's what I've been trying to tell the scientific community, Sarah said, frustration edging her voice. This isn't just about temperature changes. The thermal vent is releasing minerals and compounds that are altering the fundamental chemistry of these waters. And if my calculations are correct, the vent is expanding. What does that mean for the coast? Morton asked, a sense of foreboding settling over him. Sarah met his gaze directly. Potentially, seismic instability, habitat destruction, and in the worst-case scenario, tsunami risks. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Without my original data, though, it's just a theory, Sarah admitted, her shoulders slumping slightly. No one will take action based on the reconstructed notes of a scientist who was presumed dead. Morton was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Captain's head as the dog had moved to sit beside his chair. Finally, he spoke. Then we'll have to get you new data. Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. You need a boat, Morton said simply. I have one, and I know these waters better than any chart or GPS system. The smile that slowly spread across Sarah's face was like sunrise breaking over the Atlantic. Unexpected, beautiful, and full of possibility. 2 days later, Sarah was strong enough to be moved to Morton's cottage. Eleanor had insisted she shouldn't be alone, and Margaret wouldn't arrive for another 3 days due to weather delaying flights from Halifax. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but as Morton helped Sarah settle into his spare room, a space that had been Catherine's sewing room and had stood empty for years, he felt the walls of his solitude cracking further. I'm not used to having guests, Morton said gruffly, setting down Sarah's meager belongings, mostly items donated by Eleanor and other townspeople after hearing of the rescue. I promise not to be a burden, Sarah replied, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. Her skin had regained some color, but she still moved with the caution of someone whose body had been pushed to its limits. Just until Aunt Margaret arrives. Captain jumped onto the bed beside her, making himself at home. The dog's presence had transformed Morton's cottage, bringing life to corners that had gathered dust and silence for too long. Later that evening, As Morton prepared a simple dinner of fish chowder, his late wife's recipe that he hadn't made in years, Sarah emerged from her room, moving slowly but determinedly toward his kitchen table. She carried a notebook Eleanor had given her, already filled with hasty scribbles and diagrams. "You should be resting," Morton said, setting bowls on the worn wooden table. "I've rested enough," Sarah insisted. "My work can't wait." Morton raised an eyebrow as he ladled steaming chowder into the bowls. "The ocean's been there for millions of years. Pretty sure it can wait another day or two." Sarah didn't smile at his attempt at humor. "That's just it, Morton. Things are changing faster than anyone realizes." She opened her notebook, revealing pages of calculations and hastily drawn maps. "The thermal vent I discovered isn't an isolated phenomenon. It's part of a larger shift happening beneath the surface." Morton sat across from her, his weathered face impassive. "Eat first. Science later." Sarah took a spoonful of chowder, her eyes widening at the flavor. "This is incredible. Catherine's recipe," Morton said shortly, not meeting her gaze. "Your wife?" Sarah asked gently. Morton nodded once, focusing on his food. "She had excellent taste," Sarah said. After several silent moments of eating, she added, "I lost someone too. My research partner, David. Antarctic expedition, 3 years ago. Crevasse collapse." Morton's eyes flicked up to meet hers, recognition passing between them. The unspoken understanding of those who have watched their worlds collapse and somehow continued breathing. "That why you work alone now?" he asked. "That's why I work with Captain," Sarah corrected, glancing at the golden retriever who lay nearby, ever watchful. "Less complicated, more reliable." Morton's mouth quirked in the ghost of a smile. "Can't argue with that." After dinner, despite Morton's protests, Sarah insisted on spreading her notes across the table. "I need to reconstruct my research from memory," she explained. "Before I forget anything crucial." "What exactly were you studying out there?" Morton asked, curiosity finally overcoming his reluctance to engage. Sarah pushed back a strand of her auburn hair, tucking it behind her ear in a gesture that spoke of long habit. "The Gulf of Maine has always been known for its cold, nutrient-rich waters. It's what makes this region's fishing so productive. But over the past 5 years, I've been tracking anomalous warm currents, not just from climate change, but something more localized and intense." She sketched rapidly on a fresh page. "Then 3 months ago, I detected a thermal signature that couldn't be explained by normal oceanic patterns. It was as if someone had turned on an underwater heater in a specific location." Morton frowned. "I have noticed changes in the fish migrations. Species showing up that don't belong this far north." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Exactly. You've seen it firsthand." She leaned forward eagerly. "What species? When did you first notice?" "Triggerfish, for one," Morton replied. "Started appearing in my nets about 4 months back. Never seen them this far north before. And the lobster traps, they've been coming up emptier." The locals blamed overfishing, but your instincts told you something else," Sarah finished for him. Morton nodded slowly. "The sea talks, if you know how to listen." "That's what I've been trying to tell the scientific community," Sarah said, frustration edging her voice. "This isn't just about temperature changes. The thermal vent is releasing minerals and compounds that are altering the fundamental chemistry of these waters. And if my calculations are correct, the vent is expanding." "What does that mean for the coast?" Morton asked, a sense of foreboding settling over him. Sarah met his gaze directly. "Potentially, seismic instability, habitat destruction, and in the worst-case scenario, tsunami risks." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Without my original data, though, it's just a theory," Sarah admitted, her shoulders slumping slightly. "No one will take action based on the reconstructed notes of a scientist who was presumed dead." Morton was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Captain's head as the dog had moved to sit beside his chair. Finally, he spoke. "Then we'll have to get you new data." "We?" Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You need a boat," Morton said simply. "I have one, and I know these waters better than any chart or GPS system." The smile that slowly spread across Sarah's face was like sunrise breaking over the Atlantic. Unexpected, beautiful, and full of possibility. The morning of their expedition dawned with low-hanging fog that shrouded the harbor in ghostly white. Morton had spent the previous evening preparing the Sea Widow, checking equipment, and stocking supplies with a thoroughness that spoke of his years at sea. Sarah had watched him work, struck by the quiet competence in his movements. Now, as they loaded the last of Sarah's makeshift research equipment, borrowed from Eleanor's clinic and cobbled together with parts from the local hardware store, the gravity of their mission settled over them. "We need to reach the thermal vent site by noon," Sarah explained, securing the water testing kit to the deck. "That's when the tide will be at its lowest, giving us the best readings." Morton nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon where the fog was beginning to lift. "Weather report says we've got a window of clear conditions. Should hold until evening." Captain took his position at the bow, seemingly understanding the importance of their journey. The dog's posture was alert, his golden coat gleaming in the early light. As Morton guided the Sea Widow out of the harbor, Sarah noticed several fishermen on nearby boats watching them with undisguised curiosity. Word of her rescue had spread quickly through Osprey Point, creating a ripple of speculation and interest. "They're wondering what we're up to," Morton commented, noticing her gaze. "Small town. Not much happens without everyone knowing." "Does that bother you?" Sarah asked, studying his profile as he navigated the channel markers. Morton was quiet for a moment. "Used to prefer keeping to myself. Now," he shrugged. "Guess it doesn't matter so much anymore." The journey to the coordinates where Sarah had last taken readings before her shipwreck took just over 2 hours. As they approached, Captain became increasingly alert, moving restlessly around the deck. "He senses something," Sarah said, watching the dog. "The electromagnetic changes in the water, perhaps. That's what I was training him to detect before." Her voice trailed off. Morton cut the engine, allowing the boat to drift. "This the spot?" Sarah consulted her GPS unit and nodded. "As close as I can determine without my original equipment." She began assembling her testing apparatus, a series of probes attached to digital readers. "I'll need to take samples at various depths." For the next several hours, they worked in tandem, Morton handling the boat while Sarah collected data. The synchronicity of their movements developed naturally, as if they'd worked together for years rather than days. Captain assisted in his own way, alerting them to subtle changes in water conditions that Sarah's equipment sometimes missed. "The temperature differential is even more pronounced than before," Sarah murmured, staring at her readings with growing concern. "And these mineral concentrations." She looked up at Morton, her expression grave. "The vent is definitely expanding." As noon passed and the sun climbed higher, they moved methodically along a grid pattern that Sarah had drawn, mapping the extent of the thermal anomaly. The readings formed a clear pattern, a plume of heated water spreading from a central point near the newly formed island. "We need to get closer to the source," Sarah said finally, pointing toward the island that had become her temporary home after the shipwreck. "The epicenter is just offshore from that northern face." Morton frowned, studying the water. "Dangerous. The seabed's unstable there. Might be underwater formations we can't see." "I know it's asking a lot," Sarah acknowledged. "But without those readings, my data is incomplete." Their eyes met, a silent negotiation passing between them. Finally, Morton nodded. "We'll approach from the east. Slower, but safer." As they carefully navigated toward the island, the atmosphere aboard the Sea Widow grew tense. Captain moved to stand beside Sarah, his body pressed against her legs as if offering reassurance. Suddenly, the dog growled, a deep, warning sound that neither of them had heard from him before. "What is it, boy?" Sarah knelt beside him, one hand on his back. In the next moment, they felt it, a subtle vibration running through the boat, then a more pronounced tremor. The surface of the water around them began to ripple in concentric circles, as if something massive was moving beneath. "Morton," Sarah called out, but he was already turning the wheel, pushing the throttle forward. "Hang on," he shouted as the Sea Widow lurched into motion, speeding away from the island just as the water behind them began to churn violently. A column of steam rose from the surface, followed by a deep rumbling that seemed to come from the ocean floor itself. From the safety of several hundred yards away, they watched as a new section of the island rose from the sea in a hissing, bubbling display of geological force. The event lasted only minutes, but its implications were enormous. "My God," Sarah whispered, frantically recording with the camera she'd borrowed from Eleanor. "It's happening faster than I predicted. Much faster." Morton's weathered face was grim. Your tsunami risk just went from theoretical to probable. We need to alert the authorities, Sarah said, turning to him with urgency in her eyes. The Coast Guard, NOAA, everyone. And say what? Morton asked. That a presumed dead scientist and a reclusive fisherman witnessed an underwater earthquake? They'll dismiss it as hysteria. Sarah's expression hardened with determination. Then we'll need to make them believe us. We have the data, we have the footage, and we have the truth. As they turned the Sea Widow toward home, the weight of responsibility settled over them like a physical presence. Captain moved to stand between them, his amber eyes seeming to understand the gravity of what they'd witnessed. We're going to need help, Morton said quietly, breaking the silence that had fallen. More than just the two of us. Sarah placed her hand briefly on his arm, the contact sending an unexpected current between them. 3 of us, she corrected, nodding toward Captain. And yes, we will. By the time they returned to Osprey Point, evening was settling over the harbor. News of their expedition had already spread through town, and several curious onlookers watched from the docks as Morton expertly guided the Sea Widow to her berth. Among them was a tall, slender woman with silver hair and a distinctive purple scarf. Margaret Winters had arrived earlier than expected. The reunion between aunt and niece was tearful and intense, with Margaret embracing Sarah as if afraid she might disappear again. Captain circled around them, tail wagging frantically. I couldn't wait for the weather to clear in Halifax, Margaret explained as they walked toward Morton's cottage. I chartered a private plane. Margaret Winters, Morton quickly discovered, was not only Sarah's devoted aunt, but also a formidable journalist with connections throughout the scientific community. After hearing their account of the underwater seismic activity, she immediately began making calls. We need to get your preliminary findings to Dr. Harmon at Woods Hole, Margaret insisted, phone already in hand. He owes me a favor after that piece I wrote on his Arctic research. It won't be enough, Sarah said, spreading her hastily recorded data across Morton's kitchen table. Without comprehensive readings and official backing, they'll treat it as anecdotal at best. Then we'll get you that backing, Margaret replied with the confidence of someone accustomed to moving institutional mountains. But first, I need you both to tell me everything. Every detail, every observation, every instinct. For hours, they talked, Sarah providing the scientific framework, Morton adding his lifetime of observational knowledge about the Gulf of Maine's patterns and peculiarities. Margaret recorded everything, occasionally interrupting with razor-sharp questions that cut to the heart of the issue. Around midnight, as Sarah's exhaustion became evident, Margaret closed her notebook. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we begin our campaign. After Sarah had retired to the spare room with Captain faithfully at her side, Margaret turned to Morton, studying him with keen eyes. You saved her life, she said simply. Morton shook his head. Captain did the saving. I just happened to be there. That's not how Sarah tells it. Margaret's expression softened. She says you believed her when others might have dismissed her concerns as the ravings of a shipwreck survivor. Morton shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. The sea's been my life. You learn to respect its power and its warnings. You're exactly the kind of ally we need right now, Margaret said decisively. Someone with both experience and credibility in this community. Credibility. Morton gave a short, humorless laugh. Ms. Winters, I'm the town hermit. Haven't exactly cultivated influence these past few years. Margaret's gaze was unwavering. From what I've gathered since arriving, people here respect you, Morton. They may not understand your isolation, but they recognize your expertise. That counts for something. Before Morton could respond, his phone rang, an unusual occurrence at any hour, let alone past midnight. The caller ID showed Eleanor Jenkins. Morton, turn on your TV, Eleanor said without preamble. Channel 8. They're reporting tremors all along the coast, from Bar Harbor to Portsmouth. With a growing sense of dread, Morton switched on the small television he rarely used. The screen flickered to life, showing a serious-faced news anchor reporting on what was being described as a series of minor seismic events offshore. Officials are advising calm, the anchor was saying, but fishing vessels are being cautioned to avoid areas where water disturbances have been reported. Margaret was already on her phone again, speaking rapidly to someone about getting a video crew to Osprey Point. Sarah emerged from her room, drawn by the commotion, Captain at her heels. "It's starting," she said softly, watching the news footage of choppy seas and concerned coastal residents. "And faster than I predicted." "We need to move quickly," Margaret agreed, ending her call. "I've arranged for a producer friend from PBS to come tomorrow. We'll document everything and broadcast it alongside your data." "That still won't be enough to prompt official action," Sarah argued. "We need institutional backing, university or government." Morton, who had been listening silently, suddenly stood up. "I know someone," he said quietly. "Haven't spoken to her in 5 years, but my daughter, Jennifer, she works for NOAA in their Coastal Hazards Division." The room fell silent as Sarah and Margaret absorbed this new information. "You never mentioned a daughter," Sarah said carefully. Morton's expression was a complex mixture of pain and resolve. "A lot of things I don't mention. But Jennifer, she'd understand the science. And she has the connections we need. Will she speak to you?" Margaret asked directly. Morton met her gaze with grim determination. "For this? She'll have to." The call to Jennifer Blackwell-Reeves the next morning was one of the hardest things Morton had ever done. The years of silence between them had started after Catherine's funeral, when grief and stubbornness had created a chasm neither knew how to bridge. "Dad," Jennifer's voice held surprise and caution in equal measure. "Is everything okay?" "No," Morton answered truthfully. "It's not. I need your help, Jen. More importantly, the whole Maine coast might need it." As Morton explained the situation, helped occasionally by Sarah providing scientific terminology, he could hear the professional interest overcoming Jennifer's personal hesitation. "Send me the data," she said finally. "All of it. And Dad, it's good to hear your voice." After the call ended, Morton stood silently by the window, looking out at the sea that had been both his refuge and his prison these past years. Sarah approached quietly, standing beside him. "Thank you," she said simply. "I know that wasn't easy." Morton nodded once, his gaze still on the horizon. Nothing worth doing ever is. Within 24 hours, Morton's quiet cottage had transformed into an impromptu command center. Margaret's connections had brought not only the PBS crew, but also several prominent environmental journalists eager to document what might be the earliest stages of a significant seismic event. Sarah worked tirelessly, collating her data and preparing presentations that would be accessible to both scientific and general audiences. Captain remained her constant shadow, occasionally bringing her moments of calm with an insistent nudge when she pushed herself too hard. Morton found himself in the unfamiliar role of liaison between the scientific team and the local fishing community. His years of taciturn isolation had not diminished the respect his fellow fishermen held for his knowledge of these waters. One by one, they came forward with their own observations: changing currents, shifting fish populations, unusual water temperatures, building a collective testimony that reinforced Sarah's scientific findings. The lobstermen from Pemaquid to Portland are reporting the same patterns, Morton told Sarah as they pored over maps spread across his kitchen table. "The evidence is mounting. But is it mounting fast enough?" Sarah's voice betrayed her frustration. "The latest readings show accelerated expansion of the thermal vent. We don't have months to convince bureaucrats. We might not even have weeks." Their conversation was interrupted by Margaret's entrance, her expression unusually somber. "We have a problem," she announced, setting her laptop on the table. The initial response from NOAA's senior administration is skeptical. "What about Jennifer?" Morton asked, tension evident in his voice. "She's fighting for us," Margaret assured him. "But she's facing institutional resistance. Without more concrete evidence, they're reluctant to issue warnings that might panic coastal communities and tourism industries." Concrete evidence. Sarah slammed her hand on the table, causing Captain to jump to attention. "What do they think we've been providing? The thermal readings, the seismic activity, the geological formation of a new island. What more do they need?" "They need it from someone with established credentials," Margaret said gently. "Not from a scientist who was presumed dead and then rescued under extraordinary circumstances. They're questioning your objectivity, Sarah." The silence that followed was broken by a tentative knock at the door. Eleanor Jenkins entered, followed by a tall, slender woman with Morton's blue eyes and determined jaw. Jennifer Blackwell-Reeves carried a NOAA-emblazoned laptop and an expression of professional determination that did little to mask the emotional complexity of this reunion with her father. Morton stood frozen, suddenly aware of how much his daughter had changed in 5 years, and how much she remained the same. "Jennifer," he said simply, her name carrying the weight of regret and pride he couldn't articulate. "Dad," she nodded, professional demeanor briefly cracking to reveal vulnerability before she squared her shoulders and addressed the room. "I've reviewed Dr. Winter's data. It's compelling, but not conclusive by NOAA standards." Sarah began to protest, but Jennifer raised a hand. "However, I've been authorized to conduct an official assessment. I've brought advanced equipment, and I'm prepared to lead a proper expedition to the site tomorrow." She turned to Morton, hesitation evident in her gaze. "I'll need a boat, and someone who knows exactly where to go." "The Sea Widow's ready whenever you are," Morton replied, his voice rough with emotion. Jennifer nodded, then added with professional precision, "We'll need to deploy deep water sensors and conduct a thorough bathymetric survey. With official readings, we can fast-track the evaluation process." "And if your findings confirm our concerns?" Sarah pressed. "Then NOAA will issue appropriate advisories, and we'll coordinate with other agencies for emergency preparedness measures." Jennifer's gaze swept the room, settling finally on her father. "But we need to move quickly. The governor's office is already receiving reports of unusual wave patterns and minor coastal flooding during high tides." As practical preparations began for the next day's expedition, Morton found himself briefly alone with his daughter in the narrow hallway. The years of silence stretched between them like a physical presence. "Jen, he began, unsure how to breach the chasm. "Not now, Dad," she interrupted, not unkindly. "We have work to do first. But after." Her voice softened. "After this is over, we'll talk. Really talk." Morton nodded, recognizing in her pragmatic approach the same trait Catherine had always valued in him. Some bridges could only be rebuilt one plank at a time. As evening fell, the cottage finally quieted. Margaret had departed with the media team to prepare their initial reports, and Jennifer had retired to Eleanor's guest room to review protocols for the next day's expedition. Sarah stood on the porch, gazing out at the darkening sea, Captain a golden shadow at her feet. Morton joined her, offering a mug of tea. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." "I can't," Sarah admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that column of steam rising from the water, feel the tremor beneath the boat." She turned to him, moonlight illuminating the worry in her eyes. "What if we're already too late, Morton?" He considered her question with the careful deliberation that had guided him through countless storms at sea. "In my experience," he said finally, "the ocean gives warnings before it unleashes its full power. Our job is to make people listen to those warnings." Sarah nodded, taking comfort in his steady presence. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me, for helping, for everything." As they stood together in the quiet darkness, watching the moonlight ripple across the water, Morton realized that the walls of his solitude hadn't merely cracked, they had fallen completely. And somehow, he wasn't afraid of what would rush in to fill the empty spaces. Dawn arrived with ominous cloud cover and a brisk wind that carried the scent of impending rain. The expedition team gathered at Morton's dock, an unlikely alliance of scientists, journalists, and local fishermen who had volunteered additional boats when word spread of NOAA's official involvement. Jennifer Blackwell-Reeves stood at the center of this activity, directing the loading of sophisticated monitoring equipment onto 3 vessels. The Sea Widow would lead the convoy, with Morton at the helm and Sarah providing scientific guidance. "The survey pattern is programmed into these GPS units," Jennifer explained, distributing devices to each boat captain. "We need consistent readings across the entire grid to establish a comprehensive baseline." Morton watched his daughter with quiet pride. The determined little girl who had once followed him to the docks, peppering him with questions about tides and fish migration, had grown into a confident scientist commanding respect from everyone present. As final preparations were underway, Morton noticed Sarah kneeling beside Captain, securing a specialized vest around the dog's torso. "What's that?" he asked, approaching them. "Biosensor rig," Sarah explained, adjusting straps around Captain's chest. "I've been developing it for marine mammal research, but I've modified it for Captain. He can detect changes in electromagnetic fields that our instruments sometimes miss. This will record his physiological responses, heart rate, body temperature, muscle tension, when he senses something." Captain sat patiently through these preparations, his intelligent eyes alert to the heightened energy around him. "Never seen a research dog before," Jennifer commented, joining them. Sarah smiled faintly. "He's one of a kind. Trained him from a puppy for this work." Jennifer nodded, professional curiosity overcoming personal reserve. Innovative approach. If it works, could be valuable for predictive monitoring. The expedition set out under increasingly threatening skies. Weather reports indicated a storm system moving up the coast, adding urgency to their mission. If they didn't collect sufficient data before the weather deteriorated, their opportunity might be lost. As they approached the thermal vent site, tension aboard all 3 vessels mounted. The lead NOAA technician deployed submersible probes that would provide real-time data on water temperature, mineral content, and seismic activity. "Readings coming in now," Jennifer announced, eyes fixed on her laptop screen. The cluster of scientists gathered around her fell silent as the first data points appeared. "Water temperature at 300 feet is, my God." "What is it?" Sarah pressed, moving to see the screen. "It's 30 degrees above normal. The mineral content is off the charts." Jennifer looked up, professional skepticism giving way to concern. "This shouldn't be possible without volcanic activity." "That's what I've been saying," Sarah insisted. "This isn't a typical thermal vent. It's a precursor to something much more significant." On deck, Captain suddenly began to bark. Sharp, urgent sounds unlike his usual behavior. Sarah rushed to check his biosensor readings. His heart rate just spiked, she reported, concern evident in her voice. "And look at the muscle tension patterns. He's sensing something we can't detect yet." Morton felt it before anyone else. A subtle vibration transmitted through the hull of the Sea Widow. Years at sea had attuned him to every sound and sensation of his vessel. "Cut engines," he shouted. His command echoed quickly to the other boats. "Everyone, hold position." In the sudden quiet, the vibration became more noticeable, a low-frequency tremor that seemed to emanate from the ocean floor itself. Captain's barking intensified, his attention fixed on a point about 200 yards east of their position. "There," Sarah pointed. The water's surface had begun to bubble and churn, releasing plumes of steam into the cold morning air. Jennifer was already on the satellite phone, relaying data and coordinates to NOAA headquarters. "We're witnessing active seismic displacement," she reported, her voice tight but controlled. "Request immediate coastal alert protocol implementation." Morton maneuvered the Sea Widow to a safer distance, the other boats following his lead. Over the next hour, they witnessed a phenomenon few had ever seen, the ocean itself transforming as underwater tectonic plates shifted. New rock formations emerged briefly above the surface before sinking back beneath the waves, while circular currents formed and dissipated in unpredictable patterns. "The readings confirm it," Jennifer announced finally, her face grim. "This isn't isolated activity. It's part of a larger fault line activation extending along the continental shelf. The potential for a significant tsunami event is substantial." Sarah placed a steadying hand on Morton's arm. "How much time do we have?" "Impossible to say precisely," Jennifer replied. "Could be days, could be weeks. But what's clear is that we need to implement coastal evacuation protocols immediately for vulnerable areas." As if punctuating her assessment, a more violent tremor shook all 3 vessels. Captain barked frantically, his sensors recording unprecedented readings. "We need to pull back," Morton decided, his instincts screaming danger. Now, the return journey to Osprey Point took place in tense silence, broken only by Jennifer's continuous updates to NOAA headquarters and other government agencies. By the time they docked, emergency response mechanisms had begun to activate throughout the northeastern seaboard. News crews awaited their arrival, Margaret having prepared the media for the expedition's findings. The scene at the harbor was controlled chaos, scientists conferring urgently, officials arriving by helicopter, local residents gathering to seek information. "The governor has authorized preliminary evacuations of low-lying coastal areas," Margaret informed them as they disembarked. "FEMA is mobilizing resources. The story is going national." Morton stood slightly apart from this activity, his gaze fixed on the horizon where dark storm clouds continued to gather. Sarah joined him, captain at her side. "You were right," she said quietly. "The ocean does give warnings. And people are finally listening. Not just because of the science," Morton replied. "Because of you. Your determination, Their moment of connection was interrupted as Jennifer approached, tablet in hand. "Dad, Dr. Winters, we need you both at the emergency briefing. Your first-hand observations are critical to the response planning." As they followed Jennifer toward the hastily established command center in Osprey Point's town hall, Morton noticed the changed way people looked at him, not as the reclusive widower who kept to himself, but as someone with vital knowledge and experience. The realization was both uncomfortable and oddly affirming. Inside the crowded meeting room, federal and state officials had gathered alongside scientific experts. Jennifer efficiently organized the briefing, ensuring that both Sarah's academic expertise and Morton's practical knowledge were given equal weight in the discussions. Based on historical precedents and current data modeling, Sarah explained to the assembled group, "We're facing a complex seismic event with potential cascading effects along the entire Gulf of Maine. What Morton Blackwell's observations add," Jennifer continued, "is crucial contextual understanding of how these waters behave under normal conditions, giving us a baseline to measure deviations against." Morton felt a strange pride hearing his daughter reference his knowledge with such professional respect. When it came his turn to speak, he kept his words simple and direct, describing the changes he'd witnessed over recent months in currents, fish populations, and water characteristics. "Fishermen have been noticing these signs for nearly a year," he concluded. "We just didn't know how to read them as warnings." As the meeting progressed into detailed evacuation planning and public communication strategies, Morton found himself standing beside Jennifer during a brief break. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of unresolved history hanging between them. "Mom would be proud of you," Morton said finally. "The work you're doing, the person you've become." Jennifer's eyes glistened briefly before she blinked away the emotion. "She'd be proud of you too, Dad, for not staying isolated when it mattered most." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, nor reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a small bridge across the chasm of years. Outside the town hall windows, the storm clouds had darkened further, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Somewhere in the distance, emergency sirens started to wail. The next 72 hours unfolded with an intensity that transformed the sleepy coastal town of Osprey Point into the epicenter of a national emergency response. Rain fell in sheets, driven by winds that grew stronger by the hour, as if nature itself was underscoring the urgency of their situation. Morton's cottage became an unlikely nerve center, with scientists, officials, and media representatives cycling through at all hours. Captain remained a steadfast presence, his biosensor data providing valuable insights into the patterns of seismic disturbances that conventional equipment sometimes failed to detect. "The evacuation of coastal communities is proceeding according to schedule," Jennifer reported during one of the hourly briefings. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion, but her voice remained steady. "FEMA has established temporary shelters 20 miles inland, and the governor has declared a state of emergency for all counties east of Augusta." Sarah, who had been analyzing the latest data from NOAA's offshore buoys, looked up with concern. "The seismic activity is accelerating. The underwater pressure readings suggest we might have less time than initially projected." Morton, who had been quietly making coffee for the team, felt a familiar tension in his chest, the same instinctive warning that had saved him from countless storms at sea. "Something's coming," he said, his voice cutting through the technical discussions. "Something big." As if confirming his assessment, Captain suddenly stood at attention, his entire body rigid with alertness. The biosensor readings on Sarah's tablet spiked dramatically. "Everyone to the harbor," Morton commanded, an authority in his voice that brooked no argument. Now, they arrived at the docks just as the first unusual wave patterns became visible, not the dramatic wall of water from disaster films, but a strange, pulsing rhythm to the tide that experienced mariners immediately recognized as dangerously abnormal. The harbor water receded rapidly, exposing sections of seabed that hadn't been visible in living memory. Its drawback, Jennifer explained to the officials present, urgency in her voice. "Precursor to a potential tsunami event. We need to clear the harbor immediately." What followed was a testament to the community's resilience and the effectiveness of their emergency preparations. Warnings spread rapidly through official channels and the informal networks that connected the coastal towns. Fishing vessels that hadn't already moved to safer waters were quickly secured or taken out to sea beyond the reach of the dangerous surf zone. By nightfall, most vulnerable areas had been evacuated, though some residents stubbornly remained, unconvinced of the danger despite all evidence. Morton found himself working alongside local law enforcement, his lifetime of respect in the community lending weight to the evacuation orders. The Petersons won't leave their place on Heron Point, Officer Michaels reported, frustration evident in his voice. Say they've weathered every storm since '78, and this won't be any different. Morton nodded grimly. I'll talk to them. The drive to Heron Point was treacherous in the deepening storm, but Morton navigated it with determination, captain in the passenger seat beside him. To his surprise, Sarah had insisted on coming along. They might listen to the science, she'd argued, though both knew it was more than professional dedication driving her decision to stay by his side. The Petersons' weathered farmhouse stood on a bluff overlooking a small cove, lights glowing defiantly against the darkness. Elderly but fiercely independent, Richard and Martha Peterson represented the stubborn self-sufficiency that characterized many longtime coastal residents. Morton Blackwell, Richard acknowledged gruffly when he opened the door. Come to try to chase us off our land, have you? Come to make sure you live to see tomorrow, Morton replied evenly. This isn't an ordinary storm, Rich. The sea floor is changing. Inside, over hastily offered coffee, Sarah presented the data while Morton translated the scientific jargon into the practical language of fishermen and farmers. Captain, meanwhile, performed an unexpected role, his gentle demeanor winning over Martha Peterson, who had always had a soft spot for animals. That dog of yours seems mighty concerned, Martha observed as Captain paced restlessly near the windows facing the ocean. He's been trained to sense things we can't, Sarah explained. And right now, he's telling us we need to move inland. Perhaps it was Captain's obvious distress, or the quiet authority in Morton's voice, or the irrefutable data Sarah presented. Whatever the reason, the Petersons finally agreed to evacuate. As they drove away from the coast, Martha turned for one last look at the home they'd inhabited for over 50 years. The sea gives, and the sea takes away, she murmured, an old fisherman's wife's wisdom. Always has. They barely made it to the emergency shelter before the first significant wave struck the coast. Though not the catastrophic tsunami they had feared, it was powerful enough to cause substantial damage to shorefront properties and harbor infrastructure. Throughout the night, a series of increasingly intense seismic events generated waves that battered the coastline, validating all their warnings and preparations. In the crowded shelter gymnasium, Morton found a quiet corner where he could briefly rest. Sarah joined him, her professional composure momentarily giving way to the exhaustion they all felt. You saved lives today, she said softly. The Petersons, the McIntyres, all the others who listened to you when they wouldn't listen to official warnings. Morton shook his head. We saved lives. All of us together. Captain, sensing their fatigue, settled between them, his warm presence providing comfort in the chaos. Sarah's hand found Morton's in the semi-darkness, a simple human connection amidst the crisis. Dawn broke with unexpected clarity, the storm having passed overnight though the sea remained dangerously disturbed. Initial damage reports were coming in, significant but far less catastrophic than what might have occurred without the early warnings and evacuations. The marine geologists believe the major seismic activity has subsided for now, Jennifer reported during the morning briefing. The pressure along the fault line appears to have been released through these events. We're not out of danger entirely, but the immediate threat has diminished. As residents cautiously began returning to assess their properties, a remarkable transformation became evident throughout the community. The boundaries that had previously divided them, between scientists and fishermen, officials and locals, newcomers and old-timers, had blurred in the face of common danger. 6 weeks later, Osprey Point hosted an unusual gathering on its newly repaired town dock. What had begun as a simple ceremony to recognize those who had contributed to the emergency response had evolved into something more significant. A celebratory fusion of science and tradition, bringing together the academic community and the generational knowledge of local fishermen. At the center of this celebration stood an unlikely trio. Morton Blackwell, no longer the solitary widower, but a respected community elder whose knowledge had helped save countless lives, Dr. Sarah Winters, whose scientific research had gained national recognition and launched new protocols for seismic monitoring along the eastern seaboard, and Captain, now the unofficial mascot of a pioneering program that trained dogs to assist in oceanographic research and emergency response. As Morton watched Jennifer present the findings of the ongoing research project, a collaboration between NOAA and local fishing communities to monitor oceanic changes, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun. The emotional walls he had built after Catherine's death had crumbled entirely, allowing new connections to flourish. "Not how I expected my research to evolve," Sarah commented, standing beside him at the edge of the dock. "But maybe better this way." Morton nodded, watching as Captain charmed a group of school children who had come to learn about his special abilities. "Some rescues go both ways," he observed quietly. Later that evening, as sunset painted the repaired harbor in gold and crimson, Morton stood on the porch of his cottage, no longer a fortress of solitude, but a home once again. Sarah worked at the table inside, developing protocols for the expanded biosensor program, while Captain dozed contentedly nearby. In the spare room, Jennifer was staying for the weekend, their relationship healing through small, meaningful conversations and shared moments. Morton gazed out at the ocean, vast and powerful and mysterious as always. But now, instead of seeing only its danger and unpredictability, he recognized something else: its capacity to connect, to transform, to bring together unlikely allies in the face of common challenges. What had begun with an impossible rescue, a dog swimming desperately 5 miles offshore, had become something even more improbable: a second chance at living fully, at meaningful work, at family, both biological and chosen. The sea gives, and the sea takes away. But sometimes, if you're fortunate enough to be rescued by the right golden retriever at precisely the right moment, it gives back something more precious than what was lost. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment "I watched to the end" and share your opinion about this story. And don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting.